Here's one, though. Let me call it up. This was not on the radar coming into the night. Jeff Denham, Republican congressman, incumbent. We've called him now the winner. He's going to come in first. Question is, who's going to come in second? This is a sleeper that snuck up on people early on tonight. This guy's name is Ted House. We don't have a picture of him. Again, this is a grassroots, very conservative candidate. He is sneaking up there. Josh Harder is the front-running Democrat right now, but you see, only about 700 votes separating them, and you got a lot of Democrats. If we showed you the next screen, a lot of Democrats behind them. Very spread out Democratic vote. Harder ahead right now. Can he hold on to that, or can House get up there? Because, again, if House were to get up there, that would be a lockout for Democrats, one that they didn't see coming in a district, the 10th. This is one of those Clinton districts. So that's what we're looking at. We're going to have more votes coming in the next few hours. And again, California, they do have a lot that come in and get counted tomorrow and in the days to come. So I'm not sure how much we'll end up being able to call. And by the way, we said that governor's race. One other thing to note quickly, I do just want to show you the governor's race in California. The question coming in, could Republicans get that second spot? They're going to get the second spot. John Cox, we've now projected it'll be Gavin Newsom and Cox, the Republican. Republicans will get a statewide candidate for that marquee office there in California. And there is some talk here that Republicans may be a little better in that race than they were expecting. So joining us now to break down these results, to break down results in 7 other states on this big primary night, we have Teresa Kumar, the president and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor, Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and an MSNBC contributor, and John Podhoretz, editor of Commentary Magazine and an MSNBC contributor. And Maria, I'll start with you, and I'll just I've talked for a long time here. I'm curious, looking at those results in California, the suspense there right now, what do you make of this?
Well, I have to say, full disclosure, California is my home state, so what's happening there, not only do I find fascinating, but I think it's actually quite telling that you have a jungle primary that is going to determine the way that could possibly actually shape up Congress, and I think that is what the Republicans are concerned with. Look, the fact that even Rohrabacher has a lead, but he also has such competition even among his own party with the person that's in third place is testament that people just don't like what's happening right now with his dotted line to the Russian investigation, full stop. But I do think that we're going to see something really interesting in Gilson scenarios, because most people are going to come up and basically more than likely actually give that district a run for its money. What's going to be curious, though, is whether or not in the Central Valley you're going to get a lot of the Latino voters that are young voters, that Next Gen has dumped in a lot of money, that Voto Latinos on the ground. There's a lot of possibility and potential in that, because you have folks that are finally coming of age that just did not participate in politics because they just weren't old enough. So that is going to be really the coin toss, is that whole swath that's behind you potentially going to turn purple in the midterms.
All right, and John Podhoretz, we have numbers coming in, we have news, we have anecdotal reports. Somebody just handed me one. I haven't confirmed, but an interesting piece of information. If we can confirm it, we'll get back to that. But let me ask you about California. There are 7 Hillary Clinton won Republican-held House districts. That's almost a third of what Democrats need to take back the House. One of the questions heading into tonight was, how would Republicans feel about those districts coming out of it? When you look at this, what do you think Republicans should be taking away right now?
Well, I think this jungle primary system is so singular and bizarre, and all this gamesmanship that's going on with Democrats trying to goose the vote of extremely conservative Republicans and all of that. I think it's very hard to take a sort of general lesson. I mean, if it happens that, say, 2 of these districts end up locking out the Democrats from the top 2, or 1, that's insanely significant, because under most circumstances, if they had not, if California hadn't passed this reform that started in 2012, you could probably assume that in a favorable election for Democrats, all those 7 would go. All of them. I mean, that's what a wave is, right? Is that everything sort of tends to go in one direction. But if you institutionally structure it so that that can be prevented as an unintended consequence of a reform, you could have sort of American politics totally flipped on its head. So that Democrats could have won, could have taken the House, and will not be able to by 1 vote or 1 seat or 2 seats.
It is, Jason, fascinating, because this system in California, everybody runs on the same ballot, every voter gets the same ballot, top 2. This was passed, as John said, by referendum. Is this something that might, you think, be revisited after this year? I think I saw a poll today. It still seems popular with California residents, but you think a blue state, very blue state, Trump's always blaming it for his popular vote loss, and yet the reality for Democrats is some uncomfortable situations right now on the ballot there.
Well, yeah, the presumption when this was passed is that it was going to moderate candidates, right? But as a political scientist, I can tell you we have something called Derverger's law, where basically if you have a first-past-the-post system, that tends to moderate candidates anyway. It tends to moderate and limit the number of parties that you have. So I understand why this was passed. It doesn't end up necessarily being a good idea long-term, and you can create a lot of different problems because, you know, what you essentially have, you know, a lot of people call this a jungle primary. I call it like the Hunger Games primary. I mean, you've just got all these different Democrats who are trying to kill each other and slash each other and hope that they can get to the end. That's not necessarily the most effective thing you want as a party. Yes, we don't want this sort of old school Tammany Hall where the leadership in smoke-filled rooms decides who the Democrats are, but there has to be some semblance of party control and party unity to say, look, you've got 7%, you need to go. You've got 4%, you need to go. At the state level, you see this like in a mayor's race, right? If a lot of the cleavages are racial, you'll have a lot of the black candidates say, look, we can't have 5 black people run against this one white person, and people got to get out. We can't have this number of women, et cetera, et cetera. But that may be a lesson that the California Democratic Party has to learn as well. They've got to be able to tell some of these lower tier people, you're not going to win, you need to get out of this race. But that's hard to do. People are passionate, and there's a very fine line between encouraging victory and seeming like you're squelching dissent and activism within your own party.
Well, that's true, but I
think the challenge, though, in California is at the moment the party basically makes a nod and says, we don't want you on the ballot, that all of a sudden revolutionizes a lot of the more progressive folks. So that's actually counterintuitive. So the idea that anybody in California would basically tote the party line, I think, is testament to why we have a jungle primary. That just wouldn't work.
Yeah, being seen as sort of the establishment's out to get you can be a campaign.
But, you know, what we have here is a national trend. We saw it start in the Republican Party in 2009, 2010, in which being an insurgent in your own party is a net positive for some people, number one. And number two, the weakness of the state and national parties and their inability to do what parties did with a flick of a finger just 20 years ago, and certainly throughout American history, which is to say, no, you're not running. I mean, if you keep running, we're gonna ruin your business, or we'll give you something so that you could run next time, or we'll set up a legislative seat for you.
But you're touching upon those also the decentralization of fundraising, the fact that all of a sudden a lot of candidates can fundraise on their own without the party line. That is basically what gives this really idea that the movement is coming from the people, that the party's not basically doing the Tammany Hall, as was mentioned earlier, but it's really the people moving it forward. And it's if you were to ask me what has changed in politics more than anything, is the decentralization of traditional funding that has come to those candidates, where it's usually 5 or 6 people that decide to write the big checks. Now it's basically a level playing field that any person can give $1 and give people really boosts to actually run a candidacy.
One thing that you look at. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jason. No, go ahead.
Yeah. So you look at like a district like 48, right, where you've got Chris Scott and you've got Reuter. Like, those guys are only 1 or 2 percentage points apart. You weren't going to be able to convince either one of them to drop out of the race. And that has been, I mean, objectively speaking, that's been one of the nastiest races amongst Democrats at any point that you could see in this California primary. This is Galifianakis versus Farrell. Like, this is campaign. This is really, really ugly between these two. But they both have absolutely legitimate reasons to be in the race. And so, sometimes this is the cost of democracy. You have to have people willing to sort of slug it out. And I think in the end, I doubt Democrats are probably going to get locked out of any of these seats. A lot of the Democratic votes are going to come in later. But I think that the way that consultants have been sweating this night out, it is unlikely we are going to see something like this get adopted in Virginia or Georgia or other purple states that wouldn't want to run this risk.
And we should say, just in terms of this question of how this is all happening in California, the late vote, all of that, what has happened in the past is that basically tonight and into tomorrow, about 2/3 of the vote generally gets counted. And then over the next month, over the next number of weeks, the other third gets counted. And it is true, when I went back and looked at this, if you look statewide, if you looked at the Trump-Clinton race in 2016, there was a big swing, sort of post-election. A lot of that late vote favored Democrats. A lot of that's coming from the highly populated Democratic centers, L.A. County. when you look at some of these individual congressional districts that have been represented by Republicans for a while, that big Democratic swing was not as prevalent late. We looked at like the 49th district, the ISA district. The late vote was 51-49 Democrat there in 2016. So I'm not sure how much is going to change. Maybe it's different in a primary, but it just points to how many variables there are in a system like this that you just don't have in that many other states, and that hasn't been tested that many times here. The ballot initiative is less than 10 years ago, and this is what we've got. I do want to, in a few minutes left, though, shift to the broader sort of national implications here. One question I always look at on special election nights, on primaries, is the question of energy. And Maria, I'm wondering, are you seeing any clues here to that? Energy for Democrats, energy for Republicans in California, anywhere else tonight?
Well, we definitely saw, once again, 60% of the people that are winning so far are women. So the wave of women coming in, both on the Democratic and Republican side, is definitely on it. But I also have to recognize that we have just elected the very first Native American to Congress from New Mexico, and it looks like also we have a Latina governor that's coming also from New Mexico. So those are good wins. But I think that you're also going to see just a map where in Montana you have while Tester won, you're actually going to have a Republican possibility carrying on as well. So you're going to still have a lot of close races, but it's not as, I would actually garner to say this, it's not as much of a wave as we had seen in Virginia, as we'd seen in Georgia and Alabama. So I think that really a lot of the stuff that is coming in from the base, from the Republican Party, they're just as energized as we had seen as previously within the Democratic Party.
That is,
and I think that's very true with we're seeing right now with the results in California. You should be expecting much bigger wave in some of these really close congressional districts that are held by Republicans, and you're just not seeing that.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. We'll see the late vote here, but that is my initial reaction.
Right, and so that jives with information over the past month to suggest that all sorts of, that things are sort of closing, right? That Democratic enthusiasm is now being matched by Republican enthusiasm, that the generic ballot that says, do you want a Democrat or Republican to be your congressman in November, is narrowing. And, you know, I think everybody sort of assumed that the level of Democratic enthusiasm, wild over enthusiasm compared to Republicans in 2017, was going to carry through to 2018. And so far, we don't see that much evidence of that. I would say the Democratic enthusiasm is still greater than the Republicans, and Democrats are turning out. And there was this result in a state Senate race in Missouri that was carried by, that no one thought a Democrat would carry, and a Democrat has carried it. So there are little bits and pieces to suggest this. But if I were a Democratic political consultant or a person in the congressional or senatorial campaign committees, I'm not sure I would look at tonight and say, we're on our way. I mean, I don't think you would say, oh my God, you know, batten down the hatches, it's a disaster. But
well, is that, yeah, Jason, how do you feel about that, Jason? This idea that the blue wave, post-Alabama, post-PA18 was this huge tie. Do you feel it's receded at all? How do you look at it?
No, I think it's still going, Steve. Here's the thing. It's like in sports. It's like, hey, scoreboard, right? Democrats just flipped a 45th seat. And I, you know, as a political scientist, I've never been a big fan of the generic congressional ballot. I've always thought there were some statistical and sort of theoretical problems with reading too much into that. What I have always seen is this: if you've got low ballot special elections that people are enthusiastic enough to switch seats, but 10, 15, 24% flips from how those seats voted for Trump just 2 years ago, that shows that there is a grassroots level of enthusiasm for Democrats. I think California is a bit of an anomaly because it's a, you know, you have so many different unique factors here. I don't think the perceived lack of enthusiasm or lack of turnout in California can necessarily be seen to be indicative of what's happening in the rest of the country. I think the Democrats are fine. And I have no dog in this fight, but it seems to me that their success at the ground level with county commissioners, with state house and state senate races, seems to me these people are going to be enthusiastic and driven to vote, just like Republicans will be, but the Democratic enthusiasm might be spread throughout more states.
And that stuff
something I would actually really focus on. What the Republicans have done, they have tacked away from their tax plan. If you remember Connor Lamb, they were really going to try to test whether or not the tax plan would stick to the Republicans. That utterly failed. So their tactic now is actually shifting to anti-immigrant rhetoric. In the primaries, over 14,000 ads were run that were anti-immigrant, and that is ginning up the base. The Democrats are going to have to come up with a stronger economic message, stronger clarity of why this anti-immigrant fervor is not part of the American fabric DNA, because it is the results tonight show that it's actually working to bring in folks that are some more extreme members of the Republican Party.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, but everyone please stick around, and we're going to be back with updated numbers later in the hour and coming up next.